So apologies for interrupting your drinking and your chatting, which, as we all know, are the main occupations of people that bring them to book launches. But we thought it would be a good idea also to say something about the book, about the sport, and about the author. And since Steve is an extremely modest person and wouldn't say any of the necessary things in praise of himself, I'm going to speak first for 5 to 10 minutes. And then if he's still around, I'm going to hand over to him if he hasn't run away entirely. So first, let me welcome you to the book launch for It's a Hill, Get Over It, which is an account of fell running's history and also its characters, of which, as you can see, Steve is already one. There are different groups of people like you to be here with very different experiences of Steve, of the book, and of the venue. So welcome to people from Middlesex who are Steve's colleagues and who know him in an academic context, to people from the athletics club who probably are relatively unaware of what he does in his day job but know him more as a sportsman. And of course to his family, represented by his wife Moira, who's here. Unfortunately, the boys are not here through unavoidable other engagements, but they're here in spirit as the close family that they are. I should also introduce myself before talking about the book, in case you're wondering, well, how did I muscle in on this particular event? I'm Alan Durant. I'm Professor of Communication in the School of Law at Middlesex. But for the purposes of this evening, what's much more relevant is that I'm a late middle-aged beginner at the kind of sport that Steve has spent a great deal of his adult life involved in. So I've now begun to get a bit of the hang of this running around and running up and down that a number of people here have been doing very extensively over the years, in which the book is largely about. So Steve's book, as you'll know, is being launched. It comes out now. It's published by Sandstone Press. They made a very nice job of producing it, and I'm going to say something about it in a moment. But I'll comment just first on the title as a way into the nature of the sport that it's about. So It's a Hill, Get Over It, of course, is a kind of amusing title, which I believe Steve first saw on somebody's back on a t-shirt while they were running. And it captures not only the content of the sport, so what you do in fell running is run up a hill and then run down one for a purpose that only becomes evident when you do it enough times to see inside what the point of such an activity is. So it captures the content of the sport, but it also captures the tone of the sport, which is that although running up a hill and running down a hill can seem strenuous, arduous and exhausting, people given to such activity tend to make light of hardship, light of injury, and are on the whole stoical, fairly tough, resilient people who make light of adversity. And those people who know Steve in other capacities would probably actually concur that that describes some of his characteristics as well as some of the characteristics of the sport. So let me just say something about fell running. Since although some people here I know have engaged extensively in the sport, and certainly at least one person here has done some of Steve's most difficult running challenges with him. So some of you are much more experienced in the sport than I am, but at the other end of the spectrum, there will be people here who have no idea what fell running is, and perhaps some people have no idea what a fell is. So I thought I'd start with some basics and move from there. So fell running is running up and down fells. A fell is a hill. It's a dialect word, and it's widely used in the north of England and particularly in the Lake District. And of course, historically, there is a very close relationship between lakeland communities, lakeland occupations, keeping of sheep, hill farming and so on, and the historical development of fell running as a sport. And sometimes, in fact, that lakeland identity of fell running, it's not the only place it happens, of course, carries over into just a touch of chauvinism when people from outside the lakes encroach on the sport, win the races, or write about it. And Steve's dealt very diplomatically in the researching and writing of the book with the issues that surround his own beloved Lakeland, adopted as his favourite place, and that suspicion, sometimes reserve, that Lakeland people, Cumbrian people, have in relation to outsiders who write about the sport. The races, well, racing is one part of fell running, but it's not the only part. Lots of people do it for pleasure and don't compete. But it's a sport structured by races and race organisations, and the races can be anything from short and quick, 3-4 miles, which may not seem short and quick to everyone, but for hill runners it's short and quick, up to 30 miles, more than 30 miles, and races which can take more than one day. And I think Steve will allude probably, and there's certainly a picture up there, I think, of at least one race which Steve took part in, which takes place over a couple of days and involves camping out with relatively rudimentary equipment of a kind that I experimented and explored with Steve last weekend in rain and hailstones, and found to be, in his case, highly unsatisfactory and unfit for purpose for that kind of weather. So it's a sport that requires some endurance. Alongside those kind of races, there are longer endurance events where you're not racing against people, but you're racing against either a target time or a set of conditions. The most famous of those is called the Bob Graham Round, the Lake District, which is probably not called short by most people since it's 72 miles of running, and it's probably not called easy by many people because it involves 42 of the Lakeland Hills, and it involves 27,000 feet of going up and down in addition to running around, and all of that might seem like a relaxing occupation for someone with a few days on their hand in the lakes. The whole point of the Bob Graham Round is that you have to do all that in under 24 hours. So if you think of 3 miles of running at one end, and you think of camping and running and endurance at the other end, you'll get some sense of the scope of running. And in case I seem to have suggested that it's only associated with the Lake District, of course lots of these events take place in the Scottish Highlands, some in Wales, and some in the Dales and the other hills of northern England. It probably goes without saying then that fell running is an endurance sport. It's also, since my background is in linguistics, I have another kind of name alongside endurance sport for fell running, which is I divide sports into two kinds, an exaggeration or hyperbole sport and an understatement or euphemism sport. My example of an exaggeration sport would be, this is the finest pass you will see this season, this is the best, wow, that was wonderful, it was exceptional, it was the greatest ever. And you'll notice that from the commentary on many kinds of sport, including some athletic sports. At the other end of the spectrum, you have these understatement sports, which include fell running, as well as mountaineering and others, where a comment such as, either in a guidebook or from a fellow sports person that says, this can be slightly awkward in poor weather, is likely to mean you will certainly suffer cold and misery, you may well be injured, and you should count yourself lucky if you survive. So that's a touch awkward in bad weather. And you have to take that into account when you look at maps and you read guidebooks and so on. Well, fell running is obviously a sport of that kind, and when you read Steve's book, you'll see that writing about the sport can also adopt that slightly understated, less extravagant form of description of the hardships and endurance that sports people undergo. Well, let me say something, since I'm going to run out of time shortly, about the scope of the book. What is this book about? It has 4 kinds of things in it, and the combination of them gives you a fine, I think, wonderful portrait of fell running. So it's partly a history of the sport. It takes you from Well, it actually takes you from ancient Greece, slightly peripherally, through the development of fell running and the organisation of races, the organisation of the racing calendar across the year, the times and achievements of various racers, and the organisations which have managed the sport and sometimes squabbled among each other in relation to how it's organised. The second type of material in the book, interspersed and not always in kind of regimented order, is personal reflections by Steve on his own experiences of running, competing, and thinking about the sport. I'll say something about that in relation to him in a minute. The third type of material is a number of interviews or long conversations he conducted with eminent people in the sport, in which he has managed to take people who are often quite reserved, not particularly keen on seeking publicity, often not especially willing to talk in public, and elicited from them interesting observations about the nature of the sport, their personal kind of commitment and interest in it, and so on. So those are particularly interesting and sort of well-researched and innovatively collected kinds of material. And then the last type of material that the book contains, which makes it more than a history or a, I've been there and done it type of book, is that Steve touches on and then develops accounts of various different issues that surround the sport. I'll just pick out 4 of them here. One is that fell running is a sport which has a very interesting history in relation to the professional or amateur status of participants. So whilst in some sports there's a clear division historically and between different people, fell running has had interesting conflicts and interaction between professionals and amateurs, and Steve not only traces those interactions but also reflects on the issues involved. Secondly, he talks about women racers. It historically was a very male-dominated sport. It no longer is, and Steve charts the history and the issues in relation to participation in sport by women as well as men. He talks about the sport going global. How do you get from an introverted fell-running sport in the Lake District by remote farmers to a global competitive fell-running sport? And he discusses both how that's happened and what implications it's had for the sport. And then, in an interesting kind of coda to the book, he discusses the relationship between a very distinctive sport of fell running and other kinds of cognate sports, track events, other kinds of athletics, other kinds of sports such as cycling, triathlon, and so on. What is it about different kinds of sports that does different things to people as well as getting different things from people? And he has interesting things to say about that. But let me end with just a few things about Steve before I hand over to him to talk. So those of you who know him from the university and some of you who were in fact students with him many years ago, I think will know that Steve professionally was a cartographer and is a map enthusiast. So he started out in one kind of paradigm of map production as a kind of very careful cartographer attached to the geography department at Middlesex. He's stayed with maps, gives lectures about maps, writes about maps and mapping, through to current leading-edge developments in mapping and the production of maps, as well as also researching, in fact in collaboration with at least one person here, Ivan Shepherd, on the history of maps. So he's still actively engaged with maps and mapping as he has been throughout his professional career. He currently is engaged in educational technology and innovation within the university, and some of his colleagues from that area are also here. People from both of those groups are less likely to have a sense of his other parallel life as a qualified athletics coach as a sportsman and as an enthusiast for the outdoors, which is obviously not completely distinct from geography and mapping. Orienteering provided him with a link at one stage in his life between those different sorts of dimension, but is a side of life that you don't necessarily know if you know one part of the man rather than the other. He would probably not thank me, probably won't thank me for saying those things about him, when the things that he probably thinks I should have emphasised are his personal best marathon time was 2 hours 34, which for those of you who have done marathons will know is a pretty good time, though in case he gets too carried away, I should say it was some time ago. And the mistaken part, as I've said, in these 2-day Carrymore Mountain Marathon events, and that, with some regrets, he stopped running in 2005, but the loss to the practical running was a gain to the research and the writing, and that's really when he began to pull together thoughts that he'd had for a long time about, or questions that he'd raised really for a long time about what is this sport, why is it so engaging, what is it that motivates people who do it, and so on. It's quite possible that at an early age in school he was misdirected, that the 3 R's he was supposed to be paying attention to were reading, writing, arithmetic. He thought they were reading, writing and running. But luckily for us, so the running is slightly given way now to the writing, and the book is now produced. So if I can congratulate Steve on the production of the book, and we can perhaps all give him a round for producing it, and then he can say something about it.